Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds, and today I have Amanda Hamon Kunz with me today from Paizo. And how are you doing this morning for you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Awesome. So, I hit you up on Twitter and asked if you wanted to come on and talk about some RPG stuff, and you were gracious enough to accept. So, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to it.
So, you recently got promoted at Paizo.
I did, yeah.
So, I guess we'll start with what it is you can if you want to tell us what you do if people aren't
Sure.
familiar with you and kind of a little introduction.
Sure. I'm a managing developer at Paizo, specifically on the Starfinder RPG. So I manage the development of all the products that we produce for Starfinder, not including organized play. So all of our rules hardcovers, our adventure path volumes. We have a few other things sort of in the works that we're not quite talking about yet, but we've got a bunch of accessories and things like that. I work with a great team of folks, including creative director Rob McCurry, who's in charge of sort of all the continuity and the storylines, and I have a cat who's saying hi. So one quick pause there. In the other developers working on that game are Jason Keeley and Owen Casey Stevens, and Chris Sims and Joe Pasiti. So I work with all of those great folks to put together all of the content that you are playing in your Starfinder games.
Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking for about 15 minutes. No cat. As soon as the internet comes on, bam, cat.
Yep.
They know.
Cat,
They sense it.
Yeah, he's got that sixth sense. He's like, "Ooh, I'm gonna mess up your interview."
Mm-hmm.
He's lurking right behind the screen. So
Maybe, or they just know that everyone's waiting for them because the chat always responds once they see a cat.
Oh, I see. He knows he's the real star here.
Yeah. You know how it is with cats. It's like we're like food dispensers and we remove their waste for them, but
Yep.
other than that, it's all about them.
Yeah, for sure.
So, So I guess one of my big questions would be, we last talked about Starfinder before it came out with James Sutter and Owen. So we're going. I guess we're going on a year now that it's going to be out. So it was released at Gen
Yeah.
Con last year. We're coming up
Yep.
a couple months. It'll be a year. So what are you guys finding now that it's out in the wilds?
So we're finding a lot of the things that result from just pretty much any big game system, rules heavy game system, that there's a lot of sort of interesting things kind of going on. Of course, there's a lot of not necessarily unintended, but just sort of like permutations of rules combinations that were like, oh yeah, wow, that's kind of interesting. And so we end up talking a lot about like FAQs and things that come up like that. But in general, I think like the biggest takeaway has been just the excitement that people have been the excitement that people have been displaying for for the game. Everybody has been just, I think, like interested in something that's sort of new and fresh, and not necessarily only because it's the far future of the campaign setting, but because it's a rule set that isn't necessarily like anything else that's out there. Is not identical to anything else that's out there. So there's a lot of people who are really clamoring for additional classes or more rules for starships, or more rules for power armor, or they're latching onto one kind of concept that we maybe like dabbled throughout the game, but that they really want more of. And so that's very exciting to see people kind of pick up on the concept of the game and be excited and want more of it. I think that's a good sign for the future.
I also heard the rumor too that you guys have got some star power that's going to be throwing their way towards Starfinder as well. Not directly with Paizo, but with some of the third party stuff.
Oh, yeah, there's a Kickstarter out there that involves like Wesley Snipes,
Yeah.
which is a big deal for a lot of people in the office that have joined in as stretch goal authors and things on that. They're like, I don't know if I do a lot of third party stuff in general, but I really want to be in a book with Wesley Snipes. So yeah, that definitely kind of just came out of left field and took us by surprise.
Well,
But that's kind of an example, right, of people just being excited about the game.
Sean Aston as well. Is that right?
Yeah, he's connected to that project as well. So it is definitely just like, wow, that's random, but really
Yeah.
cool for a lot of us.
Yeah, we couldn't believe it. They actually told us about it during our live stream. with Roan and Lou. Great guys over there, and like we're kind of blown away. I couldn't believe that Wesley Snipes is actually a gamer too. You never know.
Yeah. So you learn something every day, but that is pretty exciting.
The lines have begun to blur. So, how much are you guys taking away from Starfinder to put into second edition Pathfinder, or is it is it going to be something completely different?
So second edition is pretty much completely different, except for a little bit of initial design work that went into Starfinder from the design team, the designers on Pathfinder. They were entirely different design teams. And so myself and Owen and James Sutter and Jason, we all sort of like worked in a very tight team, but because we didn't have a lot of time, it was really mostly just us kind of putting together all the rules and like getting it all kind of spun up and ready and a complete holistic system. The Pathfinder designers have done that similarly with Pathfinder 2. And so there is a little bit of an exchange of ideas, a little bit of like sort of early concepts that might be a little bit similar. But for the most part, they made the game that they really were interested in, wanted to play, and that they wanted other folks to get involved in at the company. And we did the same thing. So you're not going to see a lot of crossover. They really are pretty two separate games.
So second edition Pathfinder, does that mean less compatibility for Starfinder then?
Do you mean as far as like what we are publishing and producing?
Yes.
No, actually, we in fact recently added a person to the Starfinder team because we wanted our Adventure Path volumes to go monthly in the same way that the Pathfinder Adventure Path volumes were monthly. We just didn't have the staff to be able to do that at first, and we weren't, really sure like what the audience reaction was going to be and whether that was going to be a cost-effective thing for us to do. But once the response to Starfinder came out and it was so positive, and people were really clamoring for more adventures and more adventures. In addition to ramping up organized play, we got Thurston Hillman to do Starfinder Society for organized play. We also hired Chris Sims for the Starfinder development team, and so that was made us able to produce more and support that game more in line with what the audience was asking for. So we have two separate teams. We're not planning on ramping back Starfinder at all. In fact, just kind of the opposite. So we really hope that, we are a small staff, sort of generally speaking, but we hope that the two games aren't really going to pull resources from one another.
Actually, I guess what I really meant is like when second edition comes out, how much will you be able to port that stuff into your Starfinder game?
Okay. Oh, wow. So how much will you be able to port Starfinder stuff into Pathfinder?
And vice versa, yeah, I guess.
So I think, it won't change, obviously, for first edition. We're still going to be continuing to publish first edition books until the final hardcover for second edition publishes in 2019. So we're going to be continuing to put out new Pathfinder content, and that will be just as compatible with Starfinder as it is before. And, by saying that, it means it's not 100%, totally compatible, but there is instructions in the Starfinder book for how to do that. And with a little bit of sort of tweaking and homebrewing, you can get it figured out on the Pathfinder side. For Pathfinder second, I think it's going to be probably harder to port over just because the core systems are fairly different, but it's not going to be impossible. It's going to be the same type of situation that it just takes probably like, if it took an inch of work to do Starfinder to Pathfinder 1, it might take an inch and a half to do Starfinder to Pathfinder 2, if that makes sense.
So the Mighty Hob has a question. What was the reasoning behind making it such a design shift between PF2E and Starfinder? Won't the lack of compatibility between the systems be a problem for fans of either system?
So they're asking what was the rationale for it, or what was the reasoning for it?
Yeah, and if you guys see this as being an obstacle.
I don't think we necessarily see it as an obstacle. I think that there definitely is crossovers in the audience for people who play Starfinder and Pathfinder, or Pathfinder and Starfinder to whatever varying degree. But we really see that there are pretty separate audiences. They're pretty big separate audiences for both games. And so we have a lot of people, as I'm going out to conventions and, promoting the game and representing the company for the game, I'm noticing a lot of people who specifically play Starfinder, and maybe they came from 5e, or maybe they came from smaller games or other types of games like Shadowrun or something. But they're specifically interested in us for Starfinder. And then, of course, we have a huge Pathfinder audience that's specifically interested in us for Pathfinder. So, I don't necessarily think that that's really an obstacle. And I really think that's where our third-party publishers can come into play, because it is, an inch or an inch and a half between compatibilities. There's a ton of products out there that are third-party conversions of things, third-party versions of one game or the other. And so that stuff out there does exist. Just because we aren't necessarily producing a lot of it specifically doesn't mean that it's not something that we encourage folks to do or that we're interested in gamers having.
So as a player, do you play more or do you GM more?
It varies. Recently, I've probably been playing more, and that's really just a function of time. It takes a lot of work, obviously, to run an ongoing campaign, and I really do prefer running ongoing campaigns with a group that kind of shows up every week or every couple of weeks to continue to play a session. So I've definitely been playing more, although I've been GMing a lot of shorter one-shots and a lot of convention stuff as well, events. So I don't know, I'm pretty fickle. I kind of just do what I have time to do and what I like to do.
Nothing wrong with that. So are there a lot of in-house games going on at Paizo? Is that where you do a lot of your gaming?
Yeah, there are. So I definitely do a lot of my gaming there. At one point before we started ramping up work on the Starfinder core rulebook, I was in, I think, 3 or 4 ongoing office games. It was getting to be a little bit much, where it's like, maybe I shouldn't have committed to this 4th ongoing game. But it was great, and there was just this huge plethora of options out there. I think I was in a Hell's Rebels game and a Hell's Vengeance game, which one is an evil campaign and one is a good campaign, and they sort of take place at the same time. So that was really fun to kind of, be a character in each one and kind of watch those timelines play out. I was also in James Jacobs' developer game that had been ongoing for years and years and years. That one just wrapped up. But some of those other games, everybody just got super busy because the Starfinder core rulebook was ramping up. There was a couple other major projects going on, and folks just didn't really have time to run those games anymore. So those kind of ended, but they slowly got replaced with some shorter stuff, some more specialized stuff that people were playing. So it's fun to see the games kind of at the office ramp back up a little bit and be able to take part in some of that stuff.
So, kind of a comment in the chat, not really a question, but it kind of gives me a question to ask you. So, Carbon Fortress, from the answer that you gave, it begs the question: why make Starfinder so tied to the world of Pathfinder? Mm-hmm. So, I would ask the question: when you guys were making Starfinder, did you anticipate pulling such a new audience in, or were you thinking that a lot of your old audience would be the people playing Starfinder?
I think it was a little bit of yes on sort of both accounts. I think we knew that we were going to have people who were automatically interested in Starfinder because it appealed to them. I mean, we did the Iron Gods adventure path, which was very sort of fantasy futuristic, almost steampunk in nature, and that was very popular. So we knew that there was an audience from our Pathfinder fans also interested in that sort of thing. But we also really anticipated being able to pull in just a new audience that for whatever reason never got into Pathfinder, or maybe they were coming from D&D, or maybe they were younger, or maybe they were just not a legacy sort of Paizo fan for whatever reason. So we really created that game, and one of my core design goals was to make it accessible to people who maybe have never played an RPG before and are just interested in the art that we put out for Starfinder. We have some beautiful art in that book, some beautiful promotional art, some beautiful art of our iconics. I really wanted to write the rules to be as clear as possible, but also to provide some information, mostly in the first part of the chapter, that is very much like a step-by-step explanation of how you make characters, explaining what role-playing games are, and like some of the basic concepts that like previous core rule books have not necessarily done, because they sort of assumed they were getting an audience from another game like 3.5 or what have you. So to answer the question, yes, we knew we were hoping that we were getting some of our fans, but we really wanted to open it up to a whole new audience. And I think that has proven to be true, just based on the interactions that I've had with folks at conventions and things.
I know we were really, really close to jumping in on some Starfinder. Like you said, the art is gorgeous. It looks great. Yeah. For us, it's just like time constraints. Like we play a couple D&D games. We've got a Star Wars game going on. For a while, I also had a Marvel Phase Rip game going on. So sometimes It's just time. There's way too many games out there and just not enough time.
I know, right? That's sort of the worst.
Because my motto has always been, like, even if I'm like not in love with a particular game or system, if people that I want to hang out with are playing it, I would always play that game and still have fun. Yeah. I just might not necessarily want to run that game. It's always kind of been like my philosophy. Like, I've had plenty of friends that really like Palladium games, and I'm not a huge fan of those systems. But I'll play in those games anyway because I know I'm just going to have a lot of fun, but I would never run one of those games.
Yeah, that's kind of true. When you're GMing, it's sort of a whole different animal. Like, you have to really get into the rules, and you have to do a lot of research, and you have to do a lot of planning. And if you are not 100% in love with that system, then that's sort of a lot of work that you're not really into doing. So why do that? That makes a ton of sense.
So Jeff Van Gogh, our future Starfinder hardcovers keep on having more player-oriented material instead of GM-exclusive material. So, they're looking for more player stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. And, so if you're familiar, so the short answer is that we have tried to strike a little bit more of a balance in our hardcovers for having additional player material in addition to GM material. It's simply because we aren't doing as many hardcovers. We aren't doing the soft covers for Starfinder like we're doing for Pathfinder. We're not doing the player companion, and we're not doing the soft cover campaign setting. So we've really tried to keep in mind the fact that, we want to have material in here for everybody. In our Alien Archive book, that's a monster manual, right? That's a whole bunch of creatures, but each spread has some sort of player element that you can use, and it might be stats for playing a member of that species as a player character, or it might be like a piece of armor that the creature uses that you could make out of its hide, or some other piece of equipment or something. So we wanted, even if it's just like a little bit of text at the top, to have something for players in each of that book. In each spread of that book. We're doing the same thing going forward. At Gen Con, we're going to have the Starfinder Armory. So that book is going to be weapons and equipment and armor and pretty much all player-facing stuff. So we realize that, like, it can be frustrating to not have as much material out there. So we're really trying to pack as much as we can for players. And we have some other pretty exciting stuff coming out soon that will hopefully kind of whet sort of that appetite for some of that player-oriented stuff.
I imagine, too, if you're a Pathfinder player, you're just used to having a lot of options.
Yeah,
so you just feel like, going into Starfinder with it being still newish, you're probably feeling a bit starved.
Yeah, we were recently sort of going through what art inventory we had for the book, as far as like what half pagers do we have with the iconics, and what body shots do we have of the different character options, class features, and things like that. And it's like, oh yeah, we forgot that we had a catalog of 10 years worth of stuff for Pathfinder to do that, but for Starfinder, here are our hardcover books. It's 3 of them. So yeah, it's a constant reminder of like, wow, this is a brand new game. Presents a lot of opportunities, but it can be a challenge when you're looking for just options and things. So hopefully we can build up that catalog pretty quickly.
So TrueMate wants to know any characters that you have played with or who had really unique Starfinder character concepts.
Unique Starfinder character concepts. Wow. So I have to say that probably my favorite Starfinder character that I've played has got to be a Yosoki Technomancer named Petal. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but that was my character throughout pretty much all of our playtests. Not necessarily the playtest for the different classes, but the playtest for the core engine of the rules. And for some reason, that is just the weirdest little like dorky character. She's just like manic and runs around and like is very much like obsessed with technology and is always got to have her fingers into stuff. And you know, she's a rat folk from Akaton, but she has the outlaw theme because she stole just a little piece of technology and created a little cybernetic eye, but got that from some people that she shouldn't have, and so had to leave her planet. And that's when she became, you know, like a Starfinder adventurer. But you know, it's just this weird little character. I play these kind of like funny sort of role-playing characters all the time, but since that one was on the stream, I kept sort of getting feedback on Twitter and in emails that people loved that character. And like I got one not too long ago from somebody at an actual play podcast who said like that character made them want to do an actual play podcast. So you know, it wasn't like a crazy mechanical type of concept or anything, but it was just like the aspect of role playing was apparently something that people thought was really interesting. So personally, she's my favorite. I liked her. I just didn't expect other people to like her. But you know, that's kind of the thing about Starfinder is that there are so many different creatures that you can use as player characters. Like pretty much every concept can be unique, and you can just play kind of like any weird idea that you have in your head. So it's really fun to just take a look at character sheets I'm seeing at conventions and see what people are coming up with.
Yeah, we were part of a collab that Owen had GM'd for the Starfinder premiere. I was actually supposed to be on that game, but I happened to be traveling for one of the conventions at that time, so I couldn't make it. So one of my partners had to fill in. I was so disappointed. I wanted to figure out how to make a Yasagi, you know, Starfinder barbarian version.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There are a lot of people who are trying to mimic some sort of class concept for Pathfinder, and the ways that people are doing that are just really funny and interesting sometimes.
So I'm still waiting to get a chance to do that. I like the idea of one of these little rat guys freaking out on people all the time.
Yeah, just running into a rage, you know. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
So, James Leslie, are folks hoping to mimic the book expansion for the original PF game, or are you hoping for slower expansion with larger books? Just curious. I have to get new bookcases
for all of the books that have come out. Yeah, that's true. Our Pathfinder library is pretty huge. So I'm not sure if they mean whether we want to mimic the volume of stuff for Pathfinder or for Starfinder, but
to me it seems like they're asking like the release schedule if you're planning a slower expansion
for Starfinder or Pathfinder 2?
With Starfinder with larger books as opposed to a bunch of like smaller books, I suppose.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so in a way, I think that we are trying to keep most of our core material into the hardcovers as opposed to having a whole bunch of soft covers. You know, we love our soft cover books at Pathfinder, and they're super fun, but it just is a ton of content, and it takes a lot of staff power that we just don't have right now to do soft covers for Starfinder. So we're really sort of focusing on you know, making our hardcovers lengthwise. You know, they're not going to be longer than the Pathfinder hardcovers, but yeah, we're really trying to make sure that we produce what we can produce from a staffing perspective, but also sort of like pack all that content in there as much as we can. So you know, because we don't have a campaign setting line, we're trying to strategically plan out when we're going to be doing a big hardcover campaign setting. In our case, that was Pact Worlds, one that just recently came out in April, but really sort of stagger that so that like all of the gaming material is sort of like kind of in a place, and so in a way it will be easier to sort of sift through like where those player options are once we have, you know, a bunch of hardcovers out for Starfinder, because it will be sort of more obvious, I hope.
So personally, what are the more exciting projects for you to work on? What is the kind of stuff you like to delve into?
I really like adventure writing, and so I've been doing a lot more of that since I started at Paizo. It's just fun, from all sorts of lengths. I've written, uh, 16-page adventures, 32-page adventures, all the way up to adventure path volumes, and module length adventures. So I really like just being able to put together a story and put together an experience and create sort of like a manual for GMs to have a good time, with their players, use all that material, that we've published for Pathfinder and for Starfinder. I think all of us at Paizo have a tendency to want to do all the things, but realistically, we're super busy. Our professional schedules have a lot in them, and there's really just only so much that we can do. So I have to sort of like ramp back when I look at a project and I think, oh, I really want to write that adventure. I have to kind of consider, can you actually hit that deadline? And so it's kind of a fun give and take. But I really like adventure writing.
So you've also worked with some other companies as well. You were one of the stretch goals, I believe, for Kids on Bikes. You've done work with Kobold Press.
Yeah. So Kids on Bikes is a project that a friend of mine, John Gilmore, worked on, and his lead developer was Doug Lewandowski. Funny story, John and I are from the same area, the same tiny little rural area in Northwest Ohio. We didn't actually know each other growing up because we lived sort of in adjacent towns, and there's a little bit of an age difference. But we sort of knew of each other, and my husband was friends with some of his friends, and we were sort of always saying, communicating, we should get together, we should work on a project, we should do a thing. This is cool that we're sort of both from the same area. And then one year at Gen Con last year, I believe, we actually got together, and I hung out with some of his friends and his playtesters from that area, and he's like, okay, I got this project, we're gonna do a thing together, it's Kids on Bikes, what do you want to do? So that's how that came about, and it was really fun working on that. A smaller sort of rules light RPG. I got to write a module, which of course is up my alley, and it has very sort of like horror themes to it, which I really like horror in RPGs and writing horror, so that was super fun. And I'm excited for people to start playing that and to see if there's any interesting feedback from that module.
So have you gotten a chance, or are you looking to stretch your horror legs in Pathfinder or Starfinder?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I wrote the third module in the Dead Sons Adventure Path that came out in December, and that thing is pretty, I don't want to say hardcore horror, but there are definitely segments of it that are. We really wanted to focus on kind of the world hopping aspect of the game in this first adventure path, and so there are sort of three parts of that adventure that all take place on very different areas, but one section of that module is pretty heavily inspired by the Dead Space video game series. And so it's sort of this creepy kind of abandoned facility that you have to go through, and the things that kind of pop up, and the things that you discover about who was in this facility are very sort of tinged with some of the space alien horror themes. And then another large part of the adventure, probably like playtime wise, half of the adventure takes place on a planet called Eox, and the entire planet is full of undead creatures. The story behind that planet is they had a super weapon that kind of went awry and turned almost the entire planet's population undead. So you are adventuring on this planet and trying to solve a mystery, trying to figure out sort of the core premise of the adventure and what's going on. But the whole flavor of that is all very sort of Total Recall-esque, but with a whole bunch of undead creatures. And there's some pretty weird NPCs in there that apparently some folks are fans of.
And it makes me kind of think of Firefly and Reavers a little bit as well.
A little bit. There's not quite so much of that, but there definitely is sort of that looming threat of like, oh, what are these people? What are these creatures? Are there any of them still left here? What else have they been keeping in this area that I shouldn't be, that I should be worried about when I'm opening the door? So that's definitely survival horror, that part, the part with the abandoned facility.
So DM Don wants to know how you got into RPG gaming.
Sure. So I've been playing tabletop games since I was about 15, and my very first group was 15, 16. My very first group was in Northwest Ohio, where I'm from, and it was my boyfriend and his stepbrothers and their sort of group. So they were several years older than him, so they had been playing this ongoing homebrew 3.5 game that I kind of joined. And funny story, that game like had been going up until about 2 years ago. So that game had been running for a really, really long time. But I was kind of jumping into that game, you know, as a kid, learning kind of for the first time, going through all of the rule books and, you know, just kind of really latching on to like Vancian spellcasting. And, you know, there's a ton of classes, of course, out for 3.5. And so just sort of learning the core of the game and really just sort of like realizing slowly as I'm putting my first character together that, wow, this is a super cool game. This game feels like it was made exactly for me because it allows you to use rules to create a story. And those were always the kinds of things I was really interested in. So that's really how I got started. And then from there, just kind of playing a whole bunch of different games, you know, throughout high school and college. Played a lot of D&D, of course, played a lot of D10 games, a lot of the White Wolf games, Vampire, Werewolf, Changeling, various other games like that. I once played in a homebrew game where the GM allowed characters from almost all of those games, and so we had a party of a vampire, a werewolf, a mage, a changeling. It was hilarious. We got nothing done. We fought constantly, but it was fun. So but yeah, I mean, it's just kind of, you know, from that initial spark of realizing that this is what I really loved, just kind of went all over the place from there.
I've always liked the World of Darkness lore and concepts, but I hated the fact that they didn't go together very well. Like, you know, you had to play mage or you had to play vampire or you play werewolf. We did the same thing and it didn't go very well.
So you also had a party of a whole bunch of different
Yeah.
I feel like everybody wanted to do that, and like I can't think of a time anybody has ever had a story that worked out, but it sure is fun to try.
So James Leslie wants to know, Paizo used to run RPG Superstar every year, but discontinued it. With the success of Starfinder and PF2E coming out for playtest August 2nd, is there any talk of bringing back the contest?
You know, there's been no official talk about it, and so I'm not really sure what the future of RPG Superstar is, but, you know, there was a lot of challenges with that, and really the main thing was when the award for winning basically became writing a module, the amount of staff time that it took really to you know, to judge the whole contest and to run the whole thing, but also to, you know, work with the author and develop everything, it just became like something that was really difficult for us to pull off with all of the additional products that we were publishing. And so we just kind of had to put a pin in it. And I hope that one day we'll be able to come back to it because it is a really good way for us to learn about burgeoning new authors. It's also a really good way for people who are interested to get a taste of what game design is like and get some experience in there. So it's, you know, it's a really good thing for the industry. It's just a really sort of like labor intensive thing for the company. So I hope that we can come back to it.
So one of the questions, that's the age old question from Jose Suarez. Why the change from first to second edition PF? Many of us are happy with first. Oh, you don't have to answer that because all games evolved. As someone who kind of like started with first edition D&D and played through second and third and fourth and fifth, it's just one of those things you accept eventually. The game has to evolve and change. You learn things from designing a game, and even in D&D before, you know, up until third, there was also basic. So I'd played like 4 different editions. So I guess for me, like I never really questioned going from one edition to the other. I was already kind of trained to know that was a thing that was going to happen. We also used to play a lot of different games because TSR would put out tons of different games in different genres as well. So, but I know like at third edition, which had been around for a long time, there was a huge split in the community. You know, when we're going for fourth and Pathfinder, for me, it was never really a big deal. It's just another game.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been 10 years, right?
Yeah.
We still love, of course, Pathfinder First Edition. We're going to continue to love Pathfinder First Edition. Simply I think we wanted to do some updates and sort of reflect, some changes that in general just kind of have been going on in gaming as a whole. But we're not going to stop supporting Pathfinder First Edition. We're going to, like I said, we're going to continue to publish books through 2019. We're going to continue to have all of that back catalog kind of out there. So we're certainly not abandoning First Edition or anything like that. It was just sort of time for an update and time for things to sort of advance a little bit.
Well, after a decade or so, you learn things, and you're
For
like,
sure,
oh,
yeah.
it's time to fix some of these things that we've wanted to clean up, or whatever. I find it actually just an interesting position for Paizo to be in, because not so much because of what they did, as much as maybe the impressions from the fan base, right? Because like many of them went to Pathfinder just because they were angry at Wizards of the Coast for changing to a new edition. And if you are new to Pathfinder and that was your first system, then it probably doesn't matter that you're coming out with a second edition, right? Because you've just been playing it. But other people kind of like made the switch out of anger, where the people at Paizo themselves might have been like, well, we actually like this system and how this goes, so we're just going to continue with it. So it's a sticky place, and that's why I'm not going to bother you with a lot of questions on that, because a lot of it is opinions.
Sure,
things
yeah.
change.
I certainly understand. Not everything is for everybody, as far as not everybody wanting to prefer one thing or another. So we certainly understand all of that.
So Fantasy Ground College, they have surfaced, and they have a question: are new rule sets or settings? Are there any rule sets or settings on the horizon? Well, obviously you've got 2 of them, so I can't imagine you'd be tackling anything else in the near future.
I see. Yeah. Are we going to do any new games or anything like that? Not that folks are not already aware of. So second edition is really the big thing that we, are focusing on, and Starfinder being, a brand new game kind of coming out of the ether a little bit. I think we've sort of got our hands full with that.
Absolutely. If resources didn't matter, would you want to branch out into other genres?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if there was a perfect world or resources didn't matter, I think there'd be a lot of things that a lot of people would be interested in exploring on staff. I think that there is an interest definitely in doing additional games and not RPG systems, but board games and, other types of games like that. So I think that we're kind of thinking in that direction, but we don't have anything that we're ready to announce or anything like that yet. Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, I'd love to see us do. Maybe some like storytelling games. Love to see us do some horror, like maybe a horror system. There's all kinds of stuff that would be super cool, to do.
Well, I feel like Starfinder is a really good backdrop for horror elements.
Yeah, space horror is sweet. It's super fun to write, and we actually have an entire, and I say entire, but it's a 3-volume arc of Adventure Path volumes that is going to be a space horror themed adventure, and Jason Keeley is developing that, and that sounds like it's going to be pretty cool.
Awesome. Let's see. Cardboard Fortress has a question. I believe they're the ones that put me in touch with John Gilmore, because they are also board game designers.
Gotcha.
I'm not following the lore too close, but is there going to be any lore story in Shift to explain the shift and rule set that has been the tradition in D&D edition shifts?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So a little bit. So we've got playtest adventure that's going to be coming out along with a playtest book here at Gen Con. It's going to be a 96-page adventure module. There's not a lot, I think, that we're saying about that, but there's going to be some major sort of story elements there's going to be a bunch of like shorter adventures. There's going to be some major story elements that are going to really sort of explain like kind of what's going on as far as that. So stay tuned for the specific details, but if you're looking for story related to, you know, like edition changes, I would check out that module.
DM Don wants to know, the trend is going digital. Are you planning to do anything with that, kind of like the D&D style program? Actually, Lone Wolf does have a lot of stuff digitally for Pathfinder.
Yeah, Hero Lab. Are you familiar with Hero Lab?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Hero Lab, yeah.
Yeah. So Hero Lab is great. A lot of us in-house use it just because it's so fast for generating stat blocks and things like that. So yeah, and they support, they come up with an update pretty regularly, and they support the rules about like pretty quickly. Like I want to say like a month or two. There's not much lead time between when something comes out and when it's available on Hero Lab for an update. So yeah, that's definitely probably the best tool for running games, for making player characters.
Yeah, I'm not extensively familiar with Hero Lab for Pathfinder. I used to use it a lot for Mutants and Masterminds, which, like, for making characters, it was great. So I don't know how many of the other features are on there as far as if it works like a database for encounter building and things like that as well.
No, it's mostly just stat blocks, but there are also ways that you can use it to build like new unique monster stat blocks and stuff like that. So you can put class levels on monsters and things like that in Hero Lab. So it's pretty versatile from a statistics point of view, but I don't think it has an encounter building stuff in there.
So I definitely know from using D&D Beyond that having the access to the database for any system that you use a lot is super helpful from a creator standpoint.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
Like even just doing research, it's like, hey, we wanted to know about X spells, and with all the filters, you just punch that in. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and also just kind of reminding yourself what's out there when you're looking at that list of like, oh, I could make this a fetchling instead of a human if I wanted to. I totally that's kind of interesting. So it definitely gives you ideas, and is a good reminder of all the stuff that's out there, because, you know, we do have a pretty huge catalog of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when I used to use Hero Lab for Mutants and Mastermind, it is just so much easier to click things than look through a bunch of books and, you know, and try and remember everything.
Totally, yeah. And, you know, I think that Hero Lab, gosh, supports a ton of systems. You know, Mutants and Masterminds is one. I think Call of Cthulhu is another. There's a couple of others that are out there. I'm just not thinking, but it's all on that sort of like opening screen when you pop it open. Yeah, all the Pathfinder stuff. And you can kind of click what sources you want to use. So, you know, it's kind of boring to talk about, you know, stat blocks, but it's super, super useful. I would definitely recommend it.
So, are you still doing freelance work, or is the Paizo kind of not got your hands? I don't want to say that. Time-wise, do you have time to do it, or is this something you're interested in doing?
Oh, yeah, I still do a ton of freelance work. And I think most of the folks at the office, developers and designers, also do a lot of freelance as well. So the thing with us is that our day jobs are whatever the title is. You know, for me, it's developing and working with management and development, but all the writing that we do, that's all freelance. That's not like part of the day job. So those are contracts that, you know, we get just like any other freelancer working on a project. So, you know, if we've written something, designed something, you know, unless it's one of the staff designers, that's all going to be freelance for us. So I do a lot of that for Paizo and a little bit of that for, I don't have as much time as I used to for third-party companies or for other companies, but I definitely still do it. You know, like the thing with John on Kids on Bikes was freelance. All of my adventure paths and adventures that I've written, that's all freelance. So.
Are there any companies that you're interested in working with that you haven't gotten the chance to?
Oh gosh, yeah, definitely.
Or systems, I should say.
systems. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in doing a lot of the very like niche RPGs, and Kids on Bikes for me was definitely like a way to work with John, but also a way to work on a type of project that I'm really interested in. There's a company, or there's a game out there by a friend of mine called Bluebeard's Bride. I don't know if you've heard about it.
I
It's
have
a
not.
small, yeah, it's a role-playing game. It's a horror-based role-playing game, but it's very much like set in, like Bluebeard's manor, and it's kind of this game of horror in which you're playing, kind of one of the brides trying to kind of figure out what's going on and how you might be able to escape this terrible situation that you found yourself in. So those are the kind of games that are really interesting to me right now. In fact, I am currently playing in a game called Good Society. And I don't know if you have heard about it, but it's another Kickstarter game. It's an Australian storytelling game that my husband backed for me on Kickstarter as a birthday present, and he backed it at a level at which the creator of the game is running a private session for me and some of my friends. And so this game is inspired by the works of Jane Austen, and is a role-playing game that takes place in Regency, England. And so, so we're doing a session of that. Our second session is actually tomorrow. So working on like just a very specific type of game that is a very specific genre and a very specific sort of like role for the players is really interesting to me. I don't know if there's like one specific company, but anybody who's doing anything like that, I'm definitely interested in.
So what genre or niche would that be considered?
Hmm. Role playing game? I don't know. I don't know, but I absolutely have plans to take that game and adapt it so that we can play role-playing sessions of Pride and Prejudice and zombies, because like bucket list.
Nice.
So many of my friends are like, if you do that, I want to play. So we're totally going to do that.
Because I don't know, like I just have like there's certain types of games I just have no interest in whatsoever. And I mean, obviously the great thing about the hobby is anybody can find what they're looking for, but if there are like no sci-fi or fantastical elements to it, I'm probably not going to be interested. Historical stuff kind of bores me. So so I look at some things and I'm like, I don't know, it's just like role playing in another time period, I guess. But
yeah,
but if you had zombies, I'm down.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. This sort of lets us all play like our goofy like British accent, like snarky characters. And so it's really hilarious. The last session was basically just the GM laughing the whole time about like, I warned you this was going to be goofy. She's like, yeah, I'm glad you guys had a fun time.
Yeah, so I guess if you could, Cardboard Fortress is a question. If you could, or were going to make your own game system or setting, what would your dream or current interest be?
If I was going to make my own game setting, wow, I've thought about that a lot, and trying to come up with some sort of idea. I think probably the closest thing to that right now is something that I'm building through the Starfinder campaign setting. And that's kind of the fun thing about Starfinder, is that the universe is literally infinite. And so anything can be in there that you want it to be in there. So what I'm doing with that is I have kind of like an anime sort of horror themed planet in there that has a short write-up, and I'm sort of like adding canon elements to it in various books that are coming out. Some of it's not out yet, but it's called Daimalko, and it's basically like the themes for it. It's like a ruined sort of kaiju planet where all the survivors are mostly living underground, and they're the descendants of two major warring factions on the planet that was going on before this awakening happened, and all the kaiju kind of rose up out of the oceans, and they evaporated, and it became this post-apocalyptic wasteland where the kaiju are all running around destroying the cities. But really the stories there are sort of about like survivalism and resource scarcity and politics, and just sort of like there's an interesting element where like their leaders are empathic and have figured out ways to not necessarily control, but sort of predict where the kaijus are and where the attacks might be happening. But that's probably like what's the closest right now to like my dream setting. And the enemies that inspired that are like Evangelion, and like Knights of Sidonia and Attack on Titan. And so it's got a lot of elements of sort of like anime and J-horror and stuff like that. And so, yeah, there's the planet write-up now. There's one of the write-ups for the Colossi called the Kyokor. That's in Alien Archive 1. There's going to be some stuff about the folks who live on that planet in Alien Archive 2. So little bits here and there. If people are interested in that, check that out.
So that would be kind of a world-locked people, right? So there's not space travel. People, I mean, obviously you could travel there. Have you run any adventures? Have you been able to run many adventures there?
I have not yet run an adventure there. I think there's a very, very good chance that there will at least be an organized play adventure set there pretty quickly, but that's totally, like, I try not to be one of those really, precious protective people about, like, that's my area, you can't touch it. But that's kind of the one thing that it's like, if you guys want to do anything there, I want to do it. It's mine. So I think maybe we're all allowed to have one. I hope so.
Sure, why not? I'll give it to you.
Yeah, but I'm hoping organized play, that there will be an organized play adventure set there at some point.
So kaiju detectors like seismographs for earthquakes. I like it.
Sort of, yeah. Kind of these like empathic artifact type things that their leaders are bonded to that let them have a little bit of an idea what's going on, at least enough to be able to survive above ground, whereas everybody else has to kind of stay huddled.
They're all a bunch of Morlocks.
Yeah, kind of. They are gray skinned. That's true.
That's a great concept. I love it. So what about the convention scene? You
Sure.
will be attending many conventions?
Yeah. I have added more conventions these past couple of years to my schedule. I don't want to say I've doubled, but there's definitely been a lot more. So there's a lot of local conventions. I'm in the Seattle area here that we have that I go to. I went to NorwestCon this year, which was really fun. It was my first time at that show. That is a sort of like more general sort of sci-fi fantasy type of convention, but they have been expanding more into tabletop over the past few years. And it was really fun for me to go there and sort of interact with people from other industries that I hadn't met before, or people that I hadn't gotten a chance to sort of be on a panel with before. And that was really fun. I didn't run any games there, but there was another convention before that called OrcaCon. That's also a local convention that I was at, and I got to be in a Dread game there that Wes Schneider, who's a former editor-in-chief at Paizo, was running. So that was really fun, and I got to meet a lot of folks at those two shows. PAX Prime or PAX West now is another local one that I go to pretty much every year. Huge panels at those shows, tons of people to meet there. But then as far as like other big shows, I go to Gen Con every year. I am going to UK Games Expo again this year, which is in early June. PaizoCon is one, of course, every year that we go to. I went to Gamma Trade Show this past year in Reno, Nevada. So that's not necessarily more of a public show. That's more retailers. But I'm kind of all over the place with running games at those shows and promoting the game and meeting fans and just in general kind of hanging out with people.
What about PAX Unplugged this year?
I am, I believe, going to PAX Unplugged this year.
Cool.
So, yeah, I don't know if we have our plans for exactly what's going on, if I'm running any games or anything, but I'm on the list to go.
Yeah, I don't even know if they've put a date or not. I think like there was, and then it was taken down and put back up. That one we feel morally obligated to go to just because it's so close.
Yeah. So last year was the first year for that, right?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I heard that was just like I had sort of heard that there was a ton of companies who were going to that show, and it's like, wow, that's the first year of this show. I wonder how that's going to work out. But it sounded like it went really well, and it was really big, and there was a lot of good response to what was going on there. So that's pretty promising.
Well, it's kind of funny because we all went to that show, and like last year was really my first year going to conventions,
Mm.
and I hit like Origins and Gen Con.
Mm.
So when one of my partners was looking around at PAX Unplugged, he's been to actually a lot more conventions than me, but they're all like small.
Oh, okay.
And he's like, wow, this is so big. I'm like, this is really small. I'm surprised for PAX that they did something so small. And like, I know everyone says it was the first year, I'm like, if you do 5 or 6 conventions a year, I don't know if you get to say this is your first one. As far as from their aspect of it, it was cool for us to go.
They run exactly, yeah. They run how many conventions, so they definitely know what they're doing, which is good, right? Because sometimes there's some growing pains for conventions, and they have a lot of lessons to learn. And if you've already organized a bunch of those types of conventions, you at least know that basic stuff.
But yeah, it was definitely cool to go and say we were there for the first one.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it sounds like that's going to continue to be growing, and there's going to, continue to be more people going to that. And as fans sort of like figure out what companies are there, it should be a pretty good time. I'm looking forward to it.
So the conventions you go to, what can people expect from you? Panels, running games, just attendee?
So it usually, so I haven't been just as an attendee. Pretty much all of them. I have not gone as just an attendee for a really, really long time. Yeah, so it depends on the convention. Gen Con is less of a gaming convention as far as the staff running games than other conventions, simply because like our biggest game running presence at Gen Con is definitely organized play up in the Sagamore Ballroom. It's huge. That's where all of our Pathfinder and Starfinder Society stuff takes place. But we don't actually run staff games at that show. But we do a lot of panels. The flip side of Gen Con is PaizoCon, which is a ton of staff games and a ton of ticketed lottery games where staff are running events for people, but also like delves. And just various other like walk-up type, even hallway games or things that are sort of going on kind of spontaneously. So that's definitely a very gaming organized convention that the company runs. We also do panels at PaizoCon as well, but we focus a lot more on the games and the gaming because it's our convention. But it's really just kind of a mix. It depends on the show and depends on what sort of resources that we have. But I like doing it all. I really like running convention games because really anything goes and people are there to have a good time, and it can be fun and crazy, and it's kind of a one shot. So those experiences can be really good.
Cool. So we are coming up on the hour mark. Some parting words?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot going on if you're a Paizo fan. The Pathfinder playtest pre-order ends May 1st, so that's coming up pretty soon. If you want to guarantee that you can get a copy of the playtest core rulebook or the playtest adventure, go to paizo.com, and the pre-order will be up until May 1st. We also have lots of cool stuff coming out at Gen Con. In addition to the playtest, we have the Starfinder Armory that will be coming out, big book of weapons and equipment and all kinds of neat stuff for your characters. We have all kinds of exciting organized play things at Gen Con that will be available. We'll be having some second edition playtest stuff running at Gen Con. So if you're coming to the show, come check us out. And if not, go to paizo.com to see all of the neat stuff that we have going on.
As always, folks, there are links in the description, so you can follow Amanda on social media, as well as Paizo's in there. And stay tuned, stick around, because Ingest Quest is coming up, some D&D in space with Nerditor Doug behind the helm. I want to thank you for being a guest today, Amanda. I really appreciate you coming on. Feel free to come back anytime you like. And I want to thank everyone in the chat for hanging out with us today. As always, until next time, folks, stay nerdy.